Well, so glad. I am seriously glad that you joined us here this morning. We're currently in our series called The Invitational Life. And the series really is all about how do people who believe and follow Jesus, how do we live lives where others get to encounter the life-changing message of Jesus Christ. That is the guts of this series. And last week we had our lead pastor, Karen, bring to us this great message about how do we follow Jesus in such a way when people look at our lives, they go, wow, that is someone who believes what they believe and they have something which I want. And so she sort of looked at this idea about how can we, as followers of Jesus, pray for faces, for people who need to encounter Jesus, and pray for spaces. Where are the places that you and I need to go to so that we can love and bring people hope in especially a broken world. So my name is Josh. I'm glad you can join us. And today we're going to be looking at this idea of how do we relate well and how do we take risks. So this whole series that we're looking at is based off this book here called This Invitational Life. If you want to get it online, maybe Kurong, I'm not 100% sure. You can borrow Karen's copy after and get there really quick. And it's by a guy called Steve Carter. And the whole thrust behind his book is, in terms of evangelism, it's sort of a dirty word for some people because in the past, Christians have just gone and just Bible bashed people going, believe, 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 believe. And he's trying to say, how do we live lives where we're able to share our story and allow other people to come to know Jesus? And the four things he looks at in his book, as people who believe in Jesus, we want to live, show up, relate, and risk. And last week, Karen looked at live, be Jesus-centered, show up, go to places where people need Jesus. And then today, I want to look at relate. How do we engage in other people's lives? And risk. How do we take a step out of what is comfortable for us and trust God that He will take us into an unfamiliar place so that we can be a good message for Him. So let's start off with this idea of relating. Just in the week gone, I got to have a great conversation with a guy, and he used to be homeless. He's battled with drugs and alcohol, and he's in a home now, which is awesome. And we're having a chat, just talking about life things. And as I'm having a chat with him, I realize that I'm way out of my depth. This man has had more experiences in his life than I have. He's been in spaces and situations which are uncomfortable and tough and difficult. And as I was talking to him, I thought to myself, I don't know how I'm going to relate to him. The most experience I have with drugs is I've seen friends smoke weed. That's it. How am I going to talk to this guy who's suffered with drug and alcohol abuse? How am I going to talk to this guy who's been homeless? I've never been homeless a day in my life. And as I was chatting to him, this fear inside of me went, what am I going to say? What am I going to say to him? And as we started to talk, he started to unpack his journey. He started to unpack some of his low points and a couple of his high points. And as he was talking to me, the only thing I could do was look at him and say, wow, that's difficult. Can you tell me more? That's all I could do. And as this conversation unfolded, I realized that he was sharing quite a lot of his life and quite a lot of his struggles with me. And he was actually starting to get a little bit teary as he started to reflect on all of his difficult circumstances and realize, wow, life has been difficult and has been a struggle for him. And in that moment, I realized that me and him were relating not because we had a shared experience, a shared language, or a shared belief system. We were relating because I was just interested and loving him, and I wanted to hear his story and just say, I'm sorry. Can I pray for you? That's all I could do at the end. Is just like, can I just pray for you? There's nothing else I could do to help him. And it really made me think about how we relate to other people isn't dependent on the experiences we share. It really is all about how can we look at a person and love them enough that we become interested in them, in their experience and in their reality. And kids are really good at this, aren't they? If you go to a playground and you look at the children there, you'll see groups of kids playing together. In fact, my nephew, he's 9 years old. When we go to the playground, him and Azalea will want to play together for a bit, but then he looks at Azalea and goes, I'm not getting held back by a 2-year-old. I'm not going to get held back by this child. So he'll run off. And after about 4 or 5 minutes, he'll just start playing with a group of other kids. And they'll be shooting imaginary guns at each other. They'll be going up and down the slides. And a couple of times he's come back and I've said, oh, who's your friends? And he goes, I don't know. And then he runs off and goes and plays. And isn't it just incredible that children have this uncanny ability, regardless of the people who are around them, they just go and they just make a friend and they just do something with them. And then at some point along the line, you and I, as we grow up, we don't see strangers as people to share an experience with. We start to see other people and we start to note the differences between us and them. And as we grow up, something of that ability to be able to just go and make a friend starts to sort of fade away. Starts to fade away. And we start to think that we can't relate to that person because there's just too much of a difference between us. Maybe there's an age difference. Maybe there's a gender difference, an ethnicity difference. Maybe we look at other people and go, I can't hang out with you because you have the wrong friends or the wrong fashion sense or prefer the wrong food, or maybe you have a different belief system, different social cues, maybe your drinking habits. We look at people and we start to go, we're not similar enough that I can relate to your experience. And it's sad. We miss out on opportunities to be able to love other people and learn from other people's worldviews when we shelter ourselves off in this way. And I want to pick up here just for a second on this idea of beliefs. Because one of the ways which we tend to sort of go, are you able to relate to me or not, is through a system of belief. Do I believe what you believe? And for some reason, as adults, that becomes really important as we get along. And I want to have a look at these three sort of categories of our beliefs, just so that we can unpack this a little bit and so we can relate to other people better. So there's three sort of parts to our belief system that we have. Now, this is not exhaustive. This is just something we can look at for today. Essentials, convictions, and preferences. Your belief system, whatever it may be, has some essential components to it. That's the core principles which make what you believe what you believe. If you were to tinker with those essentials a little bit, then your belief system would change and you would have to actually alter the way that you view the world. Those are your essential beliefs. Then, when you go out a little bit, you come to your convictions. These are the things that you feel strongly about. We need to end world hunger. We need to save the whales. We need to, whatever it may be. These are your convictions. It comes out of your core and essential beliefs. And they're things that you go, I strongly believe this is how the world should operate. And a lot of our battles we have with people are normally around convictions. Just a little tip there. And then we have our preferences. These are things that we just give advantage to. So for people who go to church, maybe your preference is what time the church starts, where the church is located, what sort of music the church sings, how the church prays. In your workplace, your preferences would be, is it a workplace where I enjoy myself? Is it a workplace where they give me the pay that I need? We have preferences and things that we want to see happen, but if they're slightly altered, we can adapt, we can change. Some of us can't, and we struggle with that, but that's okay. But most of us are able to go, I didn't quite get what I wanted, but it's okay, that's just how I prefer the world to be. And some of us are way too mushy in this area, and we let people walk over us because we don't want to put our preference forward for whatever reason. So when it comes to what you and I believe, these are the three things which we can sort of break our beliefs down into: the essentials, the convictions, and the preferences. Now, this is really important for people who follow Jesus, because when we go into a situation with other people and when we go into certain places, if you believe in Jesus, then you are actually bringing Jesus into that situation. Does that make sense? You're tracking with me? If you're someone who says, my life has been changed by the message of Jesus, and you go into a situation, you are representing Jesus to that group of people, or Jesus to that particular space. And what can happen a lot of the time is we go into a place and the preferences and the convictions and the core beliefs of someone actually put us off wanting to love them the way that they deserve to be loved. It actually puts us off being able to relate to another human being, because instead of seeing someone made in God's image, which if you're a Christian, part of our essential beliefs is that God made all of us, Jesus saves all of us, and the Holy Spirit is with us now. But we go into situations and for some reason, just because they don't quite believe the way that we believe, we put this barrier between us and them. And we don't open our heart the way that we should be opening our heart. We don't love them the way that we should be loving them. And that's a big shame. That's a really big shame. I know I'm guilty of this in my life for sure. When I was in youth group, I had this really awkward encounter. I was an intern at the church. I was a youth leader. And this person came along to youth, and they were put into my small group. For those of you who haven't been to youth group, you come together and they normally subdivide it just so that you can conquer all of these rascal teenagers. Because if they're one big mob, they can get up to a lot of, so we de-weaponize them and put them into smaller groups. And I had this kid in my group. And for some reason, I don't know what happened, something ticked me, but they had this stupid preference, and their preference was that they didn't like my music. Small thing. And as we started to talk and introduce ourselves around the group, he said that I really don't like the band that you just said. Because I said, I like this band. We were saying an interesting fact about ourselves. And he opened with, I don't like that band. And for the rest of that, me leading this group, for the rest of the time, the only thing in the back of my mind is, I'm going to convince you that you should like what I like. And it did not go well because I was distracted and not listening to the needs of the group. I wasn't loving the group well, but I was just convinced in my mind, I can change what you believe. Just give me a chance. And over something so, in hindsight, so stupid. But at the time, something riled up inside of me. And I thought, this is an essential belief in me now that I need to change your mind. But you and I do this all the time. We come into contact with someone, we're relating well, we're having a great conversation, and they say something which just goes against the grain of what we believe. It goes against the grain of what we prefer. It goes against the grain of who we are. And we start to shut down and not actually love them and respect them and treat them with what they deserve. And it's a shame. So, when it comes to relating to other people, this is important not just as people who follow Jesus, it's important for everybody. We need to love other people regardless of their essential beliefs, their convictions, and their preferences. Because that's exactly what Jesus did. And as humans, it allows us to come into contact with people who hold different worldviews, and it can actually allow us to test what we believe, which is important at times. If you believe something and you cluster yourself away and you never have it tested, then you don't know what it's worth, really. So it's important to talk to people who hold different opinions. It's important to talk to people who hold different points of view because it allows us to go, is what I believe actually what I believe? Is it actually real? And it allows us to relate to other people a lot better and love people a lot better, which means we get healthier relationships, which is awesome. It's a big part of life. So how do we relate to other people? Be interested in who they are, regardless of what they believe. Just be interested in them. Jesus had no problem in his lifetime talking to people who he didn't share the same beliefs with and just loving them where they were at and just saying, tell me your story. And so we need to be doing the same thing. So, relating to other people is good, right? I think we can all agree with that. Relationships go better, life goes better when we're not fighting and having hissy fits with one another. Relating is good. Now, let's move into this idea of risk. So if we should be relating with people and loving people over here, at some point in time, you're going to want to share what you believe. If you're a Christian here this morning, what that means is that at some point you're going to want to say, I believe in Jesus and this is why. If you're someone who's still on the journey or you're not quite there yet, you have things and beliefs within you which you want to share with other people, whatever it may be. Because that's how we go deeper in relationship. We start talking about the weather, then we talk a little bit more about what sports we prefer, and then before you know it, you're sharing why you believe this is the way the world should work. If you've ever gone on a long drive with someone, like a road trip, it starts off fun for the first hour, and then you talk about some really deep stuff as you go along because you're trapped in a car with somebody, you've got nowhere to go. So as humans, we just want to relate well to one another. And there's going to be a time when, as we relate, you're going to want to share what you believe. So for the next little bit, we're going to have a look at this scripture in Luke chapter 10, verse 25 to 37. And what we're going to see in this story, it's a story that Jesus teaches. We're actually going to see the driver which overcomes the fear we have when it comes to sharing our beliefs. Because as humans, it's scary to share what we actually really do believe about something. The other night, Steve's in here. Can I share a funny story? All right, the other night we were playing Can of Worms, and we were talking about how a question was thrown out there and we say yes or no as to whether we believe it or not. And there was this great moment with Steve there where everybody in the thing said no, and you put down yes. And then instantly you looked around and you saw that everybody had put no, and you went, "Duh," and you changed your answer. I found that really, really amusing. Because as humans, there's something within us when we put ourselves out there and what we actually think, and it was a jokey question, so there's nothing serious about it, but when we put what we really think out there, we are making ourselves vulnerable. When you put what you actually think and feel about something, we make ourselves vulnerable. And if we don't feel that it is a safe place, then it can be really hard to actually share what we truly believe. So there is a risk you and I take in a relationship with a group of people in our workplace when we put something of our true selves out for other people to look at and to judge. You all know and tracking with me here? The driver for that is fear. And the thing that can overcome that fear is actually, we're going to look at it in a second, is compassion. And we're going to have a look at Luke chapter 10, 25 to 37. And we're going to have a look about this guy who it's called the Good Samaritan, who has the key into how to overcome the fear we have when it comes to sharing our beliefs and taking a risk with other people. So if you're someone who follows Jesus, it's all about, well, how do I overcome that fear of actually telling someone I do believe there is a God? And if you're not a follower of Jesus this morning, hopefully this can sort of allow you to share your true self to other people in a better way. So, Luke 10, 25 to 37. Just a bit of background for Luke. He's an author in the Bible, and he collected a whole bunch of stories of people who saw what Jesus did so that people like us, post-Jesus, can actually look at the life of Jesus better. And he records this interaction between Jesus and an expert in the law. Verse 25, this is what it says. It says, on one occasion, an expert in the law stood up to test Jesus. Teacher, he asked, what must I do to inherit eternal life? Big question. What must I do to live forever? What is written in the law? Jesus replied. And how do you read it? So the expert answered, love the Lord your God with all your heart, your strength, your mind, your soul, and love your neighbor as yourself. Good answer. You have answered correctly, Jesus replied. Do this and you will live. But the expert wanted to justify himself, so he asked, who is my neighbor? What an incredible little interaction we have here. So Jesus is talking to someone who is an expert in the law, who knows all of the Old Testament. When he's saying the law, we're talking about the first 5 books of the Old Testament, and we're talking about what the Jewish tradition is built on. And when the expert answers Jesus, he's actually pulling from 2 verses, one in Deuteronomy, one in Leviticus, to give an answer to Jesus, which is wise to do. And I love that Jesus doesn't answer the question straight away. The man came up to Jesus and asked, what do I have to do to inherit eternal life? Jesus is more than qualified to answer outright in this space. As the Son of God, as someone who is fully God and fully human, he's able to answer this person like that, but he doesn't just go and give him the answer. He turns the question back onto the expert of the law and says, well, what do you think? Which is incredibly wise. When someone asks you something, sometimes it's good to find out what they're thinking and where their motives are. And Jesus just says, well, what do you think? And he gives a good answer. But he wants to know, who is my neighbor? So Jesus tells him a story. Verse 30. In reply, Jesus says this. A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho, and he was attacked by robbers. The robbers stripped him of his clothes, beat him to within an inch of his life, and left him half dead on the side of the road. A priest happened to be going down the same road. And when he saw the man, he passed by on the other side. So too a Levite. And when he came to the place and he saw the man laying on the side of the road, stepped across to the other side and kept on walking. But a Samaritan, as he traveled, came to where the man was, and when he saw him, he took pity on him. What an incredible little story. Let's break down a couple of things. A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho. He's given no identity. In fact, he stripped off his clothes and beaten to within an inch of his life. One of the easiest ways to recognize where someone is from is clothing and accent, right? So before you outright ask someone, excuse me, sir, ma'am, where are you from? Normally you sort of take a quick look and see what they're dressed in, and then you hear their accent. And you, most of the time we're able to have a stab in the dark and near enough get it. Sometimes we get Scotland and Wales confused or something, but most of the time we get things in the right place. I'm terrible at geography, so I get it wrong nearly all the time. But this man, he has no clothes, and he's unconscious on the side of the road. So when these people approach him, they don't know who he is. He's unidentified. So that's the first thing that we learn here. The second thing we learn here is that Jesus is talking to a Jewish audience. So when he talks about a priest coming and a Levite coming, the Jewish audience who are listening probably think to themselves, these people are going to step in and help the situation. Because the question is, who is my neighbor, right? And these two people who are high up in the Jewish religion come by. And they're probably thinking, well, these guys are going to help the person because we're looking at the idea of who is my neighbor, and they're meant to do that because the priest especially represents God to the people of God and does things on behalf of God in the temple. So you'd think that this person who should be representing God, when they see someone in need, would step in and would help. So to contextualize that for today and for our situation, the story would probably read, a man was beaten and left half for dead. Then Karen and Josh go past, and we keep on walking. Now, you may know me a lot, you may not know me that much, but as a human being, you think someone would step in and help these, right? At the very least, call 000. They couldn't do that back then, but these days, cool. But imagine me just looking at that situation and just walking on by. Or maybe in your workplace, you see the boss. The boss walks past the situation and just turns a blind eye, doesn't get in there. One of the reasons we pay our bosses a lot of money is so that they will face danger, right? So you'd think the people who are high up in organizations or the people who are high up in religious institutions, when they see an injustice being done, they would step in. But they don't. And that's what this audience is hearing right here. This Jewish audience are hearing that a priest and a Levite look at this mess and they keep on walking. So you can imagine them going, well, that's not right. And then Jesus goes on to say, but a Samaritan who is traveling by comes where he is and takes pity on him. Now, just to sort of explain the Samaritan-Jewish relationship, it was not good. It was not good at all. In fact, I can imagine as Jesus is telling this story, there would be people in the audience who, when they heard him say, and then a Samaritan came along, I can imagine them in their brains going, and he probably finished the job. Or, and he probably made it worse. Or there's a Samaritan entering the story. This is not good news. Because the Samaritans and the Jews did not get along. They did not get along at all. In fact, the Jews looked at the Samaritans and sort of saw them as a half-breed. Because there's a lot of history and a lot of things there. The Samaritans changed the place of worship. They took the 5 books and they sort of twisted them a little bit. And the Jews and the Samaritans, they were not friends. They were not in the same room. They were not invited to the same parties. So these people listening to this story here, and a Samaritan came along, and they probably went to they would have been like, this guy's not there to help. And Jesus says, but the Samaritan who came along actually looked and took pity on the man. And then in verse 34, this would have really confused the audience, I'm sure. He went to him, bandaged his wounds, poured oil and wine over him, put the man on his own donkey, and brought him to an inn to take care of him. There's a man dying on the side of the road. And this Samaritan, someone who the audience despised, got off his donkey, walked over, addressed his wounds the best he could then and there, put the man onto his own donkey, which means he would have had to walk next to him, which is, if it's your donkey, you're riding the donkey, but no, puts the man on and they walk. And he goes and takes him to a place where he can look after him better. Then he says to the innkeeper, after taking care of him for a day, look after him, and if there's anything he needs, get it for him. Here's a couple of bucks. Here's 2 denarii. And if anything else happens that you need to pay more money for, I'll reimburse you when I get back. With any expenses he has, I'll pay you back. So Jesus asks his audience, who do you think the neighbor was? And he looks at the expert of the law and he looks him in the eye and says, who was the one who was a neighbor to the man on the side of the road? And the expert in the law replied, the Samaritan. No. He replies, the one who had mercy on him. He doesn't even go and say the Samaritan was the one who does. He says the one who had mercy on him. And Jesus told him, go and do likewise. Here at the end of the story, we have a great point. Go and do likewise. The whole reason Jesus tells this story is to sort of set us up with how someone who follows him should love other people. How we should be loving people in such a way that we love them without exception, qualification, and question. And he does this beautifully through this story, where he takes the expectations of the audience that someone who is similar to them will aid this person, and he actually takes an enemy of them to help and look after this person. And he looks at the audience and he says, you guys need to go and love other people likewise. People you don't share similarities with. People who don't see the way that you see. People who don't see the world the way that you believe they should see the world. We need to love other people without exception, qualification, and question. So now we come to this idea of the risk within all of this. Do you remember back in verse 33, it says the Samaritan took pity on him. Sort of an odd phrase, isn't it? Took pity on him. The word for pity here is compassion from your bowels. That's great, isn't it? What a great compassion from your bowels. That just brings imagery you don't want to think about. This idea that there is a deep moving sense of compassion from within the depths of the person. So when he looks at this man on the side of the road who's dying, he is moved by the deep compassion within him. This is not the sort of compassion you have where you look at someone who's suffering and go, oh, I feel sorry for you. Or where you see a situation and you go, I feel bad for what's happening there. It's not that sort of compassion. This Samaritan was moved so much that he was spurred into action. The compassion and the pity that he felt moved so deeply within him that this is not right, that this is not how someone should be treated, that it actually moved him to go and do something about what he saw. That's the sort of compassion that he had. And this here is the key to overcoming the risk when it comes to sharing the deep things of who we are. You and I will never share those deep things unless we truly are moved to love the other person regardless, where it spurs us into action. Let me explain it this way. When you meet someone for the first time, you go through the small talk. And then one of you will say something which is basically an invitation for deeper relationship. They might make a comment on something to do with politics. They might make a comment on something to do with religion or something to do with their workplace, or they might just throw a concern they have out there. And it's an invitation for you to be able to converse with them and go deeper with them as a person. The fear that stops us from sometimes going to those places is that we will reveal a part of who we are. And that can be scary. But we can overcome that fear when we look at the people around us and we love them so much that we just want to show our heart because we believe it's the best thing that can deepen a relationship and can help them in their situation. And until you and I are moved with a deep sense of compassion from within us, until we're moved with a deep sense of love for another person, it will always be difficult to share the depths of our heart. But if you and I believe, and I especially believe this, that Jesus loves everybody on this earth, died for everybody on this earth, and wants to see a difference in their life, and that difference is that his name is the center of who they are, then we need to be moved deeply so that we can overcome that fear we have and share with them and say, this is what Jesus has done in my life. I believe he can do the same thing for you. And that's the risk. The risk is exposing what we believe, being open to ridicule, and being open to people making fun of us. But at the end of the day, if you're deeply moved and you have that sense that you need to do something about it, that won't look like a risk at all. It'll just look like something which is just, might happen, whatever. I love you enough, I'm going to do something regardless of what you think of me. As we conclude this morning, I'm going to invite the band to jump back up. And I just want to sort of close out Karen's week and my week and then set you guys up for the next 4 weeks. So last week, Karen talked about live with Jesus at the center of your life. And as you do that, go to places where people need to hear about him. And then this morning I said to you we should relate to other people because we love them. And we need to take a risk, but that's overcome when we actually care and really do love another person. So here's the 4 things again, just to get everyone on the same page. Live with Jesus at the center of your life and be guided by the Holy Spirit. Show up where people need to hear about the life-changing message of Jesus. Relate to those you come into contact with. Engage with them by being interested genuinely in who they are. You can fake it if you want to, but if you really don't care about another person, it will show. You won't make eye contact with them, and the person will look back at you like you're not actually listening to me. So don't do that. Don't just fake it. All right? It's just awkward for everybody. Care enough about them that you want to actually be interested in what they're doing. And then trust God and take a risk. Don't be silent. Move to action. Don't just spectate what happens in life. Actually be willing to step out and talk on behalf of those who can't. Love those who are unlovely and care for everybody you come into contact with.